The shoes sat exactly 37 inches from the cliff edge, laces tied in double knots, positioned as if someone had just stepped out of them and walked away barefoot into nothing. Deputy Marcus Holt stood over them with his Polaroid camera, the midday sun bleaching his vision white. 2 years. 731 days since 17-year-old Rachel Brennan disappeared from a family camping trip in California's Mojave Desert, and now this, her hiking boots, weathered but intact, appearing on a sandstone overhang 15 miles from where she was last seen. The discovery didn't make sense. Not the location, not the condition, not the timing. Before we dive in, tell us where you're watching from. And don't forget to subscribe if you enjoy deep, real-world investigations. Because what happened next would challenge everything investigators thought they understood about this case. March 1996. The Brennan family had driven out from Barstow for a weekend trip to Rainbow Basin, a geological formation popular with rockhounds and amateur geologists. Rachel, their eldest, had brought her biology textbook. She planned to study for her AP exam between hikes. Her younger brother Tyler, 14, brought his metal detector. Their father James documented everything with his Minolta film camera, the way he always did. They set up camp Friday evening near Owl Canyon, a moderate trail that wound through layered sedimentary formations. The ranger station logbook showed their check-in at 4:47 p.m., James Brennan's signature next to their vehicle registration, a 1989 Ford Bronco, Nevada plates. The forecast promised clear skies and temperatures in the low 80s. Perfect conditions. Saturday morning, Rachel asked to hike alone to photograph barrel cacti for her biology project. She'd done solo day hikes before, always within a defined radius, always with a return time. James gave her until 2 p.m. She took a canteen, her Nikon F3, a compass, and a topographic map with their campsite marked in red pen. She wore denim shorts, a white tank top, and those hiking boots. Tan Vasque sundowners with green laces she'd broken in over the previous summer. She never came back. By 3:30 p.m., James and Tyler were calling her name through the canyon corridors. By 5 p.m., they'd driven to the ranger station. By 6:15 p.m., San Bernardino County Sheriff's Search and Rescue had mobilized their first response team. Deputy Holt arrived with the initial ground crew at dusk, watching the desert horizon swallow the last daylight in bands of orange and purple. The search lasted 11 days. They deployed K-9 units, helicopter sweeps, and over 200 volunteers who walked grid patterns through 40 square miles of desert terrain. Rachel's scent trail led the dogs northeast from camp, then simply stopped near a dry wash approximately 3 miles out, as if she'd evaporated mid-step. No struggle signs, no blood, no torn fabric caught on cholla spines or creosote branches. The only evidence they found was a lens cap from her camera, discovered half buried in sand 2 miles past the wash, but the camera itself never surfaced. Investigators interviewed the other camping parties. A retired couple from Arizona remembered seeing a young woman, matching Rachel's description, walking alone around noon, heading toward the basin's northern rim. A group of geology students recalled passing someone on the trail, but couldn't provide useful detail. No one reported anything unusual. No suspicious vehicles, no strangers watching the campsites, no sounds of distress. The Brennans appeared on local news broadcasts. James held up Rachel's school portrait. Her dark hair pulled back, that half smile she wore when she was thinking about something else. The mother, Susan, sat rigid in her chair, hands folded so tight her knuckles showed white through her skin. Tyler stayed silent, staring at the studio floor. They offered a $5,000 reward for information. Tips poured in. Rachel was seen hitchhiking near Victorville. She was spotted boarding a Greyhound in Las Vegas. Someone's cousin's friend swore she was working at a diner in Laughlin. Each lead was followed, documented, and eliminated. The FBI opened a case file, possible abduction, possible runaway, but nothing concrete enough to justify sustained federal involvement. By late April, the active search suspended. Rachel Brennan became another name in the missing persons database, another family living in permanent limbo. Marcus Holt kept the case folder on his desk. He'd been the first deputy to interview the family, had walked those search grids until his boots wore through. Something about Rachel's disappearance felt wrong in a way he couldn't articulate. Not the usual runaway pattern, not the usual abduction indicators. Just wrong. He read through the file weekly, looking for what he'd missed. 2 years crawled past. The Brennans moved to Oregon, unable to stay in a house that still smelled like their daughter. Tyler stopped speaking to his parents entirely. Guilt and grief had calcified into something unreachable. James stopped taking photographs. Susan started attending a support group for families of the missing, sitting in church basements and listening to other people describe the same shapeless ache. The reward money went unclaimed. The case went cold. Then came that April morning in 1998 when a rock climber named David Chen called the San Bernardino Sheriff's Dispatch from a payphone in 29 Palms. He'd been scouting a new route along the Hexie Mountain's western face when he spotted something out of place on an approach ledge. Hiking boots, positioned neatly side by side, laces tied, no visible damage. The coordinates Chen provided placed the discovery site nearly 15 miles southeast of Rainbow Basin, across completely different terrain. The Hexies rose from the desert floor in rugged granite formations, technical climbing territory with exposure that killed unprepared hikers every few years. Chen, an experienced climber with his own equipment, said he'd examined the boots briefly but hadn't touched them. They looked weathered, but structurally intact. And stranger, the ledge they sat on was accessible only by technical ascent or helicopter insertion. No reasonable foot approach existed. Holt took the call personally. Within 90 minutes, he stood in Chen's climbing shop, looking at the climber's annotated topo map. Chen pointed to a feature marked Bishop's Ledge, a narrow shelf about 40 feet below the rim, facing north, sheltered from direct sun by an overhang. He'd been photographing the route with his telephoto lens when he spotted the boots. The photos, still in the 1-hour development envelope, showed exactly what Chen described. Tan leather boots with green laces, positioned as if in a shoe store display. Could someone have thrown them from above? Holt asked. Chen shook his head. Not with that placement. They'd tumble, scatter. These looked arranged. How long do you think they've been there? Hard to say. That ledge is protected. Rain shadows, minimal wind. Could be weeks, could be longer. Holt drove back to the station and pulled Rachel Brennan's file. He laid out the family photographs James had submitted, zooming in on the shots taken that last morning at camp. There, Rachel tying her boots before heading out, the green laces distinct against the tan leather. Vasque sundowners, men's size 7. She had narrow feet and preferred the sturdier build of the men's model. He made 2 calls. The first to a helicopter service the county contracted for mountain rescues. The second to a forensic investigator named Patricia Kern, who specialized in exposure analysis, determining how long materials had been weathered by environmental conditions. The helicopter pilot, a Vietnam veteran named Ray Doss, agreed to fly Holt up the following morning. Kern said she'd need to examine the boots in person before making assessments, but cautioned that 2 years of desert exposure would complicate any timeline estimation. Holt didn't sleep that night. He sat at his kitchen table with the case file, running through every scenario. If Rachel had somehow reached that ledge 2 years ago, why had the search helicopters never spotted her? If someone else had placed the boots there recently, who and why? And that detail Chen mentioned, the careful positioning, suggested intention, not accident. At first light, Holt met Doss at the county airfield. They loaded minimal gear, evidence bags, camera equipment, rope, and a portable VHF radio. The flight took 18 minutes, following Highway 62 southeast before banking toward the Hexie's distinctive silhouette. Below them, the desert unrolled in shades of rust and tan, dotted with Joshua trees that looked like dark punctuation marks. "There," Doss said through the headset, pointing. Bishop's Ledge appeared as a dark horizontal line across the granite face. Doss brought the helicopter into a hover, rotor wash kicking up dust devils. Holt could see the boots now, exactly as Chen described, sitting 37 inches from the drop, laces tied in precise double knots. "Can you set me down?" Holt shouted over the engine noise. Doss shook his head. "Not enough clearance." "I can lower you on the winch, but you'll be working alone up there." Holt clipped into the harness. The descent took 3 minutes, spinning slowly as the cable played out. His boots touched stone, and he unclipped, immediately kneeling to examine the boots before disturbing anything else. The leather showed weathering, consistent with prolonged desert exposure. Surface cracking, faded color, dust worked into every crease. But the degradation seemed uniform, not concentrated in areas that would suggest someone had worn them recently. The rubber soles displayed wear patterns that matched walking, not climbing. And inside, barely visible in the shadow of the ankle cuff, Holt spotted something, a name written in black permanent marker on the insole. R. Brennan. He took 12 Polaroids from different angles, then carefully bagged each boot separately. The ledge itself measured roughly 9 feet long and 4 feet deep, protected overhead by a granite overhang. He swept the space with his flashlight, looking for anything else. Fabric, hair, bones. Nothing. Just wind-polished stone and the shallow depressions where the boots had sat. "Coming up," Holt radioed. Doss winched him back to the helicopter. During the return flight, Holt stared at the evidence bag in his lap, trying to construct a narrative that made sense. Rachel disappears from Rainbow Basin. 2 years later, her boots appear on a ledge 15 miles away, in terrain she never planned to visit, positioned with almost ceremonial care. Back at the station, he logged the evidence and called Patricia Kern. She arrived that afternoon, setting up her examination in the department's property room. Holt watched through the observation window as she photographed the boots under different light spectrums, took scrapings from the leather, and examined the laces under magnification. After 90 minutes, she came out with preliminary notes. The weathering is consistent with approximately 18 to 24 months of desert exposure, which fits your timeline. But here's what's strange. The degradation pattern suggests these boots weren't worn during that exposure period. They were sitting static, likely in the position you found them. "So someone placed them there," Holt said. "That's the only explanation that fits the physical evidence. And recently, within the past 2 to 3 months, based on the dust accumulation patterns on the laces, someone put 2-year-old boots on that ledge this spring." Holt felt something cold settle in his stomach. Could Rachel have hidden them 2 years ago and then someone found them? Possible, but unlikely. The leather shows continuous exposure, not storage and re-exposure. These boots have been weathering steadily since she disappeared, just not in that location. "So, where have they been?" Kern shook her head. "That, I can't tell you. But whoever placed them on that ledge wanted them found. That positioning wasn't random. Would you have made the same call if you'd been in their place, following a lead that seemed to create more questions than answers? Holt reopened the investigation officially. He started by pulling every report filed in the 2 years since Rachel's disappearance: missing persons, unidentified remains, Jane Does admitted to area hospitals. Nothing matched. He contacted the Brennan family in Oregon, asking if they'd received any communication, any hints that Rachel might still be alive. Susan Brennan's voice broke over the phone. No, they'd heard nothing. Was this real? Were the boots really hers? He couldn't give her answers yet. Instead, he focused on the practical questions. Who had access to the Hexy Mountains? Who had the skill to reach Bishop's Ledge? And most importantly, who would want to place Rachel's boots there now, 2 years after her disappearance? Holt drove back to Rainbow Basin with Tyler Brennan, who'd flown down from Oregon when he heard about the discovery. Tyler, now 16, had grown into a gaunt, quiet young man who seemed to carry his sister's absence like physical weight. They walked the original search area, retracing the route Rachel had taken that last morning. "Did she ever talk about climbing?" Holt asked as they followed the wash where the K9 unit had lost her scent. "No. She was into biology, ecology. She wanted to study desert adaptation in plants. Climbing wasn't her thing. Did she know anyone who climbed? Maybe through school?" Tyler thought for a moment. "There was a guy. He worked at the outdoor shop where she bought her boots. I remember because he gave her a discount and my dad joked about him hitting on her." Back in Barstow, Holt found the store, Desert Outfitters, a local place that sold camping gear and climbing equipment. The owner, a woman named Margaret Walsh, remembered Rachel. Sweet kid. Came in maybe 4 or 5 times that summer before she disappeared. Always asked good questions about gear. "Do you remember the employee who helped her?" Margaret's expression shifted. "Danny Oakes. Yeah, I remember. He quit about a month after that girl went missing. Said he was moving to Colorado for better climbing." "Did he and Rachel know each other outside the store?" "I don't know. Danny was, he was good with customers, especially young women. I never saw anything inappropriate, but he had that kind of intensity, you know? Like he'd focus on someone and make them feel like the only person in the room." Holt got Danny Oakes's last known address and ran him through the system. No criminal record, but his social security number showed employment history in California, Colorado, Nevada, moving every 6 months to a year. No permanent address, no landline, the kind of person who lived out of a truck and climbed full-time. But there was something else. Oakes had worked briefly as a guide for a climbing service based in Joshua Tree National Park, the area that included the Hexy Mountains. His employment record showed he'd led groups up various routes in the park, including approaches near Bishop's Ledge. He would know how to access that exact location. Holt put out inquiries through climbing communities, outdoor shops, and guide services across the Southwest. It took 3 weeks, but eventually someone responded. A climbing ranger in El Dorado Canyon, Colorado, who recognized Oakes's name. He'd been working at a local shop, living in a converted school bus parked on someone's property outside Boulder. Holt made arrangements with the Boulder County Sheriff's Department and flew out on a Friday afternoon in early May. A local deputy named Sarah Chen met him at the airport. "We located the bus," she said as they drove into the foothills. "Oakes is there. We told him we had questions about an incident in California, and he agreed to talk." The property sat at the end of a dirt road, surrounded by ponderosa pines. The bus was painted forest green, solar panels mounted on the roof, climbing gear hanging from racks on the side. Danny Oakes sat outside in a folding chair, carving a piece of wood with a pocket knife. He looked up as Holt approached, early 30s, weathered face, the kind of lean build that came from years of technical climbing. "You're the California deputy," Oakes said, not standing. "Marcus Holt. Mind if we talk?" "About Rachel Brennan." It wasn't a question. Holt felt his pulse spike. "You remember her?" "Of course I remember her. She disappeared. I saw it on the news." Oakes set down his carving. "You found something." "Her boots, on a ledge in the Hexy Mountains." Oakes's expression didn't change. "Bishop's Ledge. You know it. I've climbed there multiple times." He stood finally, meeting Holt's eyes. "You think I had something to do with this? I think you knew Rachel. I think you have access to the place where her boots were found, and I think you understand why I'm asking questions." Oakes nodded slowly. "Come inside. I'll show you something." The bus interior was organized with the efficiency of someone who lived in small spaces. Built-in bed, propane stove, milk crates for storage. Oakes pulled a plastic bin from under the bed and extracted a photo album. He flipped to a marked page and handed it to Holt. The photograph showed Rachel Brennan standing next to Oakes in front of Desert Outfitters. She was smiling, holding a new pair of boots, the Vask Sundowners with green laces. The date stamp in the corner read July 1995, 8 months before her disappearance. "We were friends," Oakes said quietly. "Not dating, not anything inappropriate. She'd come into the shop and we'd talk about desert ecology, about climbing as a way to access remote study sites. She was brilliant, really brilliant, not just smart, but curious about everything." "Why didn't you come forward during the investigation?" "Because I was scared. I'm a climber who knew a missing teenage girl. I knew how that would look. And honestly, I didn't think I had information that would help. I wasn't there when she disappeared. I was climbing in Red Rocks that weekend. I have witnesses, receipts, everything." Holt pulled out his notebook. "Tell me about the last time you saw her." 2 weeks before the camping trip, she came into the shop wanting advice about photographing in harsh light. Said she had a biology project coming up. I recommended some film stock, talked to her about composition. That was it. Normal conversation. Then she was gone. "Did she ever mention the Hexie Mountains, Bishop's Ledge specifically?" Oakes frowned. "No, Rachel wasn't interested in technical climbing. She wanted to hike, not rope up." "But you've been to that ledge?" "Yes, I guided a group there about a year ago. It's a good intermediate route, nice exposure without being terrifying." "When, exactly?" "Summer of '97. July, maybe early August. And you haven't been back since?" "No, I've been in Colorado since last September." Holt studied him, looking for tells. Oakes met his gaze steadily, no fidgeting, no defensive posture. Either he was innocent, or he was an exceptional liar. "Would you be willing to take a polygraph?" "Yes. And I'll give you anything you need. Employment records, climbing logs, witness statements. I want to help find out what happened to Rachel. She deserved better than just vanishing." They spent the next 2 hours going through Oakes's documentation. His climbing journals showed entries for Rainbow Basin in 1995, but nothing after Rachel disappeared. His job history confirmed employment in Colorado from September 1997 onward. His guide certifications showed the Bishop's Ledge trip in July 1997, with client signatures and payment records. Holt returned to California with copies of everything, plus Oakes's contact information and a promise to take the polygraph within the week. Deputy Chen from Boulder followed up on Oakes's alibi, interviewing his employer and checking his apartment rental history. Everything confirmed his timeline. The polygraph came back clean. Danny Oakes wasn't lying when he said he didn't place the boots on the ledge, didn't harm Rachel, and genuinely wanted answers, which left Holt back at the beginning. If not Oakes, then who? And more pressingly, why? Patricia Kern called Holt into the lab a week later. She'd been conducting additional analysis on the boots, focusing on microscopic details that might reveal their history. On her examination table, she'd laid out photographs showing the boot treads at high magnification. "Look at the sediment composition," she said, pointing to a series of samples. "The primary soil matches Mojave Desert characteristics. Silicate sand, gypsum traces, exactly what you'd find around Rainbow Basin. But embedded deeper in the tread, I found something else." She pulled up a different image. Granite particulate, consistent with the Hexie Mountains formation. But here's what's interesting. This granite material is only in the deepest tread channels, the oldest sediment layer. The Mojave soil is layered on top. Holt leaned closer. Meaning Rachel wore these boots on granite terrain before she wore them in Rainbow Basin. The geological timeline is backwards from your investigation timeline. She hiked in the Hexes before the camping trip? Or someone else wore these boots there first? Kern pulled up another magnified image. But there's more. I found organic material in the ankle cuff. Plant fragments, specifically Yucca brevifolia needles. Joshua tree, Holt said. Joshua trees grew throughout the Mojave, but they were especially concentrated in Joshua Tree National Park, which included the Hexe Mountains. Right. And based on the degradation state of these needles, I estimate they became embedded in the fabric approximately 12 to 18 months before Rachel disappeared. The implications hung in the air. Holt pulled out the case file, spreading Rachel's timeline across Kern's desk. Summer 1995. Rachel buys boots from Danny Oakes. Fall 1995 through early spring 1996, she breaks them in on local hikes. March 1996, she disappears wearing them. But Kern's evidence suggested the boots had been in the Hexes before that, possibly as early as late 1994. Could Rachel have borrowed someone else's boots? Holt asked. Possible, but the name is written inside, and the wear pattern matches a size 7 foot. These were made for her. Holt drove back to Rainbow Basin alone, this time with the geological survey maps Kern had provided. He wanted to understand the terrain connection, how Rachel's boots could contain evidence of both locations, and what that might reveal about her last day. He parked at the Owl Canyon trailhead and walked the route Rachel had taken 2 years earlier. The spring afternoon was still, just the sound of his boots on decomposed granite and the occasional cry of a red-tailed hawk. He followed the trail northeast, past the point where the dogs had lost her scent. The wash opened into a broader valley, hemmed by low ridges on both sides. Holt pulled out his compass and topographic map, orienting himself. According to the search records, helicopters had covered this entire area multiple times. They'd found nothing. But what if Rachel hadn't stayed in this area? What if she'd headed toward the Hexes that day, a 15-mile journey through open desert? Impossible on foot in a single afternoon, especially in March heat, unless someone had picked her up. Holt stood there, turning slowly, trying to see what the investigators had missed. And then something caught his eye, a glint of metal wedged in the root system of a creosote bush about 30 yards off trail. He walked over and crouched down. It was a belt buckle, tarnished but intact, partially buried in the sandy soil. The design showed a rock climber ascending a vertical face, with the letters JT stamped below, a souvenir from Joshua Tree. Holt bagged it carefully, noting the GPS coordinates on his notepad. Back at the station, he logged the buckle as evidence and called Margaret Walsh at Desert Outfitters. "Do you sell items with the Joshua Tree logo?" "Sure. We carry various branded merchandise, T-shirts, patches, stickers, belt buckles. Did Danny Oakes ever wear one?" There was a pause. "You know, I don't recall, but a lot of climbers have that buckle. It's pretty common in the community." Holt tried a different approach. "Do you remember any other employees or regular customers from that time period who were serious climbers? People who might have known Rachel?" "There was Ben Haywood. He worked here for a few months in 1995, helped with the climbing section. Real technical guy, very knowledgeable. Rachel definitely talked to him. They'd have these long conversations about geology and desert plants." "Is he still in the area?" "No, he moved away. Arizona, I think, or maybe Utah. He was kind of a drifter, worked enough to fund his climbing, then moved on." Holt felt the investigation narrowing. "Do you have any employment records? Last known address?" "I can check my files." Give me a day." While waiting, Holt returned to the belt buckle, examining it under better light. The metal showed corrosion patterns consistent with at least 2 years of desert exposure. The leather belt material had degraded completely, leaving only the brass buckle. But there was something else. On the back of the buckle, scratched into the metal with a sharp implement, were initials, B.H. Ben Haywood. Margaret Walsh called back the next morning with an address in Flagstaff, Arizona, from Haywood's employment application. The phone number listed was disconnected, but Holt contacted the Coconino County Sheriff's Department and asked them to check current records. The response came 3 hours later. Ben Haywood was dead. He'd fallen from a climbing route in Oak Creek Canyon in September 1997, approximately 18 months after Rachel's disappearance. The death had been ruled accidental, failed protection placement, equipment failure, standard climbing tragedy. He'd been climbing alone, and his body wasn't discovered until 2 days later when other climbers found him at the base of the wall. Holt sat in his office, staring at the timeline. Ben Haywood works at Desert Outfitters in 1995, overlapping with Rachel's visits. He wears a belt buckle that ends up in Rainbow Basin, near where Rachel disappeared. He dies in a climbing accident a 1.5 years later. And 6 months after his death, Rachel's boots appear on a ledge he would have known how to access. But if Haywood was dead, who placed the boots? Holt called the detective who'd handled Haywood's death investigation. According to the report, Haywood had been living out of his truck, climbing full-time, minimal possessions. After his death, his few belongings were distributed according to a handwritten will. Climbing gear went to various friends, personal effects to a sister in Utah. "Did anyone claim his journals or notebooks?" Holt asked. "Let me check. Yeah, a woman named Melissa Haywood, his sister. I have a forwarding address in Moab." Holt made the drive to Utah himself, leaving before dawn and arriving in Moab by late afternoon. Melissa Haywood lived in a small house on the outskirts of town, surrounded by red rock formations that glowed in the failing light. She answered the door, holding a paintbrush, her hands stained with acrylic colors. "I'm Deputy Marcus Holt, San Bernardino County Sheriff's Department. I'm investigating the disappearance of Rachel Brennan, and I believe your brother might have known her." Melissa's expression went very still. "Come in." The house smelled like sage and linseed oil. Melissa offered tea, then sat across from Holt at a handmade wooden table. "Ben never got over it," she said finally. "Rachel's disappearance. He blamed himself. Why? Because he was supposed to meet her that day. She'd called him the week before the camping trip, said she wanted to talk about something important. They made plans to meet at Rainbow Basin Saturday afternoon. But Ben got delayed. Some climbing trip ran long, and by the time he got there, she was already missing. Holt felt pieces clicking together. Did he tell the investigators this? He tried. But he said they didn't take him seriously, treated him like a suspect instead of a witness. After that, he stopped cooperating. Just retreated into climbing, like he always did when things got hard. Did he ever mention what Rachel wanted to talk about? No. But after she disappeared, he became obsessed. He'd spend weeks in the desert, searching areas the official search missed. He kept journals, detailed notes about where he'd looked, what he'd found. He was convinced she hadn't just vanished, that there was an explanation. "Do you still have those journals?" Melissa stood and walked to a bookshelf. She returned with 3 spiral notebooks, their covers sun-faded and worn. "I couldn't throw them away. They're all I have left of him, really. The Ben who cared about something besides his next climb." Holt opened the first journal. The entries began April 1996, weeks after Rachel's disappearance. Ben's handwriting was precise, almost architectural, recording coordinates, terrain descriptions, and theories. He'd searched areas far beyond the official perimeter, following intuitions about where someone might go if they were lost or fleeing. In the second journal, dated September 1996, Holt found an entry that made his breath catch. Talked to Tyler Brennan today. He mentioned Rachel had been researching something before the trip, some kind of ecology project involving plant adaptation in extreme environments. She'd marked locations on a private map, places she wanted to photograph. Tyler said their father didn't know about it, thought she was just studying near camp. But what if she'd planned to go further? What if someone knew about those locations? The third journal covered 1997, and the entries grew more fragmented, more desperate. Ben had started climbing more aggressively, pushing into harder terrain. But in June 1997, there was one final entry about Rachel. Found her boots, hidden in a cairn off Highway 62, near the Hexie access road. Someone placed them there deliberately, wrapped in plastic. The plastic protected them from full exposure. Someone is playing a game, laying breadcrumbs. But why? And who? Holt looked up at Melissa. He found the boots. I didn't know that. I never read the journals carefully. It hurt too much. What did he do with them? I don't know. His truck and gear were impounded after his accident, then auctioned off when I couldn't afford storage fees. Everything's gone. But Holt understood now. Ben had found Rachel's boots in June 1997, wrapped in plastic, placed by someone who wanted them found but not yet. He'd taken them, maybe trying to understand what they meant. And then in September 1997, he'd died. Patricia Kern's analysis showed the boots had been exposed on Bishop's Ledge for 2 to 3 months before discovery, which meant someone had placed them there in early 1998, months after Ben's death. Someone who had access to his belongings. Someone who knew about Rachel's disappearance and wanted to send a message. Who handled Ben's estate? Holt asked. Mostly me, but his climbing partner Jake Ruiz helped sort through the gear before I shipped it. Why? I need to talk to Jake Ruiz. Jake Ruiz lived in a trailer park outside Moab, working construction during the week and climbing on weekends. Holt found him that evening, pulling into the gravel lot just as Ruiz was arriving home from a job site. He was in his early 30s, built like a linebacker, with the scarred hands of someone who made his living with tools. San Bernardino Sheriff's Department, Holt said, showing his badge. I need to ask you about Ben Haywood. Ruiz's expression darkened. What about him? Specifically, I need to know what happened to his belongings after his death. Melissa shipped most of it back to Utah. I kept some climbing gear he'd wanted me to have. Wrote it in his will. Why? Did you go through his truck? Sort through personal items? Yeah, it was a mess. Ben lived out of that thing. Clothes, food wrappers, journals, random gear. I pulled out anything valuable, gave the rest to Melissa or the Goodwill. Did you find hiking boots? Women's size 7, tan leather with green laces? Ruiz went very still. Yeah. They were in a milk crate under a tarp. I thought they were weird. Too small for Ben, and they looked old, weathered. I asked Melissa about them, but she didn't know anything. What did you do with them? Ruiz looked away. I took them to Bishop's Ledge. There it was. Holt kept his voice level. Why? Because Ben had marked that location in one of his journals, circled it like it meant something. And I knew he'd been obsessed with the Rachel Brennan case. I figured maybe the boots were hers. Maybe Ben had found them and was planning to turn them in, but never got the chance. So I thought, I don't know, I thought if I put them somewhere visible, somewhere climbers would see them, maybe someone would call it in and the family would get closure. Why didn't you just turn them in directly? Because I was scared. Ben died under strange circumstances. The gear failure didn't make sense to me. He was too careful, too experienced. And if those boots were connected to a missing girl, and he'd been keeping them secret, I didn't want to get involved in whatever that was. I just wanted the family to know she'd been real, that someone hadn't forgotten. Holt studied Ruiz's face, the guilt written there, the defensive posture. "Did you ever consider you might be tampering with evidence?" "Every day. But I figured 2 years had passed, the case was cold, and maybe this would restart things. Was I wrong?" "Yeah, but I understand why you did it." Holt pulled out his notebook. "Tell me about Ben's death. You said the gear failure didn't make sense." "Ben climbed with me the day before he died. We checked all his gear together. Cams, nuts, ropes, everything. It was all solid. Then he went out alone the next morning and his protection ripped out. But the gear we'd inspected showed no sign of damage. So either he placed it wrong, which he never did, or something happened to it between our climb and his fall." "Like what?" "Like someone tampered with it. Cut the rope strands, weakened the metal. I told the local sheriff this, but they said I was making excuses because I couldn't accept my friend died from a mistake." Holt felt the case shifting again. "Did Ben ever mention feeling threatened? Like someone was watching him?" "Not directly, but the last few times we climbed, he kept looking around, checking sight lines. I asked what was up, and he said he felt like someone was tracking his movements." "Did he say who?" "No. Just that he'd stirred something up, and he needed to be careful." Ruiz met Holt's eyes. "You think someone killed him?" "I think Ben knew something about Rachel Brennan's disappearance, and that knowledge might have gotten him killed. And if that's true, then the person who took Rachel is still out there." Holt returned to California with copies of Ben Haywood's journals and a new theory that felt both monstrous and inevitable. Someone had taken Rachel Brennan in March 1996. That same person had kept her boots as a trophy. Ben Haywood had found the boots a year later, recognized them, and tried to understand what they meant. His investigation got too close, and he was killed. Then, to cover the trail, someone used Jake Ruiz's predictable guilt and loyalty to plant the boots in a location that would restart the investigation but lead nowhere. Except it had led somewhere. Just not where the killer expected. Holt needed to identify who had the knowledge, access, and motive to execute this plan. He started by mapping relationships. Who knew both Rachel and Ben? Who understood climbing well enough to sabotage gear? Who had reason to want Rachel gone? He returned to Tyler Brennan, now living in Portland and working at a community college. They met at a coffee shop near campus, Tyler looking older than his 18 years, wearing the exhaustion of someone who'd been carrying weight too long. "Tell me about Rachel's ecology project," Holt said. "The one she was working on before she disappeared." Tyler frowned. She never really explained it, just said she was mapping plant distribution patterns in extreme environments. She had this private notebook where she marked locations. She wouldn't show it to anyone, said it was part of her research methodology. "Do you remember anything specific she mentioned? Any locations?" "She talked about granite formations a lot. Said they created unique microclimates that supported unexpected plant life, and she mentioned wanting to photograph Yucca brevifolia at different elevations. Joshua trees, granite formations, the Hexi Mountains. Did she ever mention meeting anyone during her research? Maybe another student or a guide?" Tyler went quiet for a moment. "There was a professor, Dr. Simmons, I think. He taught ecology at the community college where she was taking her AP Bio class. Rachel mentioned he'd offered to help with her project, give her access to research sites he was studying. Holt felt electricity run through him. Did she meet with him? I think so. Maybe twice. I remember because my mum got weird about it, said it wasn't appropriate for a professor to meet alone with a high school student, but Rachel insisted it was professional, that he was just helping her with methodology. Do you remember his first name? Carl, maybe? Or Craig?" And Dave, back at the station, Holt pulled records for Barstow Community College in 1995-1996. The ecology department had 3 faculty members. One was a woman in her 60s, Another was a man who'd retired in 1994. The third was Dr. Craig Simmons, hired in 1995, specializing in desert ecology and plant adaptation. Holt ran Simmons through every database available. The man had a clean record, solid academic credentials, publications in peer-reviewed journals. His employment at Barstow Community College had been unremarkable. He'd left in 1997, taking a position at a university in New Mexico. But when Holt dug into Simmons's background before Barstow, he found gaps. The man's resume showed a graduate degree from Arizona State University, but employment records between 1990 and 1995 were sparse and inconsistent. Short-term contracts, visiting positions, nothing permanent. The kind of pattern that suggested someone moving frequently to stay ahead of scrutiny. Holt called Arizona State's biology department and spoke to an administrator who remembered Simmons. Smart guy, but intense. There were complaints from female students about his teaching style. Nothing concrete, just discomfort. He left the program voluntarily before any formal investigation. What kind of complaints? Inappropriate attention mostly. Wanting to meet students outside office hours, offering extra help that felt like personal interest. You know the type. Holt knew exactly the type. He contacted the New Mexico University where Simmons had worked since 1997. According to HR records, Dr. Craig Simmons had resigned abruptly in January 1998, 3 months before Rachel's boots appeared on Bishop's Ledge. No forwarding address, no explanation. He'd simply stopped showing up. Finding Simmons became the priority. Holt worked with federal databases, tracking credit card usage, vehicle registrations, anything that might reveal current location. But Simmons had gone completely dark. No financial activity, no employment records, no utilities in his name. Then Holt remembered Ben Haywood's journals. He pulled them out again, reading through every entry systematically. In March 1997, almost exactly a year after Rachel's disappearance, Ben had written, "Ran into that professor today, the one Rachel mentioned. Simmons. He was parked off Highway 62, supposedly collecting plant samples. But he acted strange when he saw me, like he recognized me and wasn't happy about it. Asked what I was doing out there. I said hiking, kept it vague. He watched me until I left. Something off about that guy." Highway 62 ran through Joshua Tree National Park, the same area where Ben had later found Rachel's boots hidden in a cairn. Holt contacted the National Park Service, requesting records of research permits issued in 1996-1997. Among dozens of names, he found Craig Simmons, with permits authorizing him to collect plant samples from various locations, including the Hexie Mountains. The permits gave him legitimate reasons to access remote areas, to be alone in the backcountry, to establish patterns that wouldn't raise suspicion. The theory assembled itself. Simmons befriends Rachel under the guise of helping her research. He offers to show her unique study sites. She agrees to meet him on her family camping trip, the secret plan Tyler mentioned. But instead of returning Rachel to camp, Simmons takes her somewhere else. Abduction? Murder? The fate remained unclear. But Rachel never comes back. Ben Haywood starts searching, following leads the official investigation missed. He encounters Simmons in the desert, suspicious, but without proof. Simmons realizes Ben is getting close. A year later, Ben finds Rachel's boots hidden near the park. Simmons's mistake, keeping a trophy too close. Ben's investigation intensifies. Simmons, now desperate, sabotages Ben's climbing gear. Ben dies. Simmons takes the boots from Ben's truck after his death, eventually planting them on Bishop's Ledge through Jake Ruiz's unwitting assistance. But where was Simmons now? And more importantly, where was Rachel? Holt returned to the original search area one final time. this time with Ben Haywood's journals and the research permit coordinates. He cross-referenced locations where Simmons had authorized access with the terrain Rachel would have crossed leaving camp. One site appeared in both datasets, a remote canyon system in the Hexi Mountains, accessible only by rough four-wheel drive road, rarely visited outside official research trips. Simmons had permits for that area throughout 1996. And Rachel's hypothetical route from Rainbow Basin would have passed within 5 miles of the access road. Holt organized a ground search, bringing cadaver dogs and a small team of experienced desert rescue personnel. They drove into the canyon system on a Tuesday morning in late May 1998, following the coordinates from Simmons's research permit. The terrain was harsh. Jumbled granite boulders, barrel cacti, brittlebush growing in cracks. They spread out in a grid pattern, the dogs working methodically through the heat. Holt moved along the canyon floor, examining depressions and overhangs where someone might hide remains. At 2:47 p.m., one of the dogs alerted near a collapsed mine shaft, partially obscured by creosote growth. The handler called Holt over. Together they cleared the vegetation and examined the opening, a vertical shaft dropping approximately 20 feet into darkness. Holt lowered himself on rope, carrying a high-powered flashlight. The shaft opened into a small chamber, maybe 8 feet square, with evidence of old mining activity, rusted tools, broken timbers, and in the far corner, beneath a layer of desert dust and decomposed fabric, he found human remains. The skeleton lay in a semi-fetal position, clothing fragments suggesting denim and cotton consistent with what Rachel had been wearing. Near the remains, a Nikon F3 camera, the body cracked but intact, and on the pelvic bone, a small leather wallet containing Rachel Brennan's driver's license, the photograph still visible despite the degradation. Holt sat in that darkness for a long moment, feeling the weight of 2 years settle into clarity. Rachel was dead. She'd been dead since that March afternoon. But now, finally, she could come home. The forensic analysis took 6 weeks. Dental records confirmed the remains belonged to Rachel Brennan. Cause of death was determined to be head trauma consistent with a fall. The back of her skull showed a depressed fracture. But the forensic pathologist noted something else. The injury pattern suggested she'd been struck rather than falling naturally. Someone had hit her, possibly with a rock, and then disposed of her body in the mine shaft. The camera yielded crucial evidence. Although the film had been exposed, forensic specialists recovered partial images from the negatives. Most showed desert landscapes, botanical subjects, but the final 2 frames showed a man, mid-30s, sandy hair, wire-rimmed glasses, standing next to a truck with research equipment. The photo quality was poor, but enhancement allowed for identification. Dr. Craig Simmons. Holt issued a federal warrant. The FBI joined the investigation, elevating Rachel's death to a homicide case. They traced Simmons's movements after he left New Mexico, following a trail of cash transactions and false identities through Arizona, Nevada, and eventually into California. In July 1998, California Highway Patrol spotted a vehicle matching the registration Simmons had used in Arizona, a white Ford Ranger with camping equipment in the bed. They initiated a stop near Lone Pine in the eastern Sierra Nevada. Simmons attempted to flee on foot into the desert, but was apprehended within 2 miles by CHP officers and tracking dogs. In custody, Simmons initially refused to talk, but when confronted with the photographs from Rachel's camera and the forensic evidence from the mine shaft, he understood the case was closed. He requested an attorney and, through counsel, eventually provided a statement. According to Simmons's account, Rachel had contacted him about her ecology project, interested in studying plant adaptation in the Hexi Mountains. He'd offered to guide her to research sites during her family camping trip. They'd arranged to meet Saturday afternoon at a specific location off Highway 62. Rachel had hiked out from Rainbow Basin, following a route she'd mapped herself, intending to photograph the sights and return to camp before evening. But when they met, Rachel had become uncomfortable with Simmons's attention. He'd grown increasingly personal, suggesting they extend the trip, making comments that felt inappropriate. Rachel insisted on returning to camp. An argument developed. Simmons grabbed her. Rachel pulled away, threatening to report him. In that moment, Simmons claimed he panicked. He struck her with a rock, intending only to stop her from leaving, but the blow killed her. Terrified, Simmons had disposed of Rachel's body in the mine shaft, taking her camera and boots to prevent identification. He'd hidden the boots off Highway 62, planning to destroy them later, but never following through. When Ben Haywood found them a year later and began asking questions, Simmons felt cornered. He'd sabotaged Ben's climbing gear, making his death appear accidental. The prosecution didn't believe Simmons' version. The calculated disposal, the trophy-keeping, and the murder of Ben Haywood suggested premeditation, not panic. But the evidence was sufficient for conviction, regardless of Simmons' narrative. In December 1998, Craig Simmons was convicted of 2 counts of first-degree murder. He received life without parole. James and Susan Brennan attended every day of the trial, sitting in the front row, holding hands. Tyler sat with them, no longer the silent teenager, but someone finding his voice through testimony and victim impact statements. When the verdict was read, Susan Brennan wept, not from joy, but from the exhausted relief of finally knowing. Rachel's remains were cremated and scattered in the Mojave Desert, in a location the family kept private. Danny Oakes attended the memorial service, along with Jake Ruiz, Margaret Walsh, and dozens of people who'd participated in the original search. Ben Haywood's name was read aloud, acknowledged as a victim of the same violence that took Rachel. Holt stood at the back of the service, watching the family mourn and heal in equal measure. The case that had consumed 2 years of his life was closed, but the weight of it would never fully lift. Rachel Brennan had been 17 years old, curious and brilliant, with decades of life stolen from her. Ben Haywood had been a flawed but decent man who died trying to find truth. Both deserved better than the violence that found them. In the months that followed, Holt returned to routine patrol work, but he kept Rachel's case file on his desk, not as a reminder of success, but as a testament to persistence, to the importance of following evidence, even when it led through years of darkness and dead ends. The hiking boots remained in evidence storage, tagged and catalogued. Those green laces tied in careful double knots had traveled from a teenager's camping trip through a killer's trophy collection, into a dead man's truck, onto a remote cliff face, and finally into the truth that brought a family closure. They were just boots, but they'd become the thread that unraveled everything. Patricia Kern retired from forensic work 2 years later, but before leaving, she wrote a paper on environmental trace evidence analysis, citing Rachel's case as an example of how geological and botanical materials could reconstruct timelines and movements. The paper became required reading in forensic programs across the country. Danny Oakes continued climbing and running his shop in Colorado. He never spoke publicly about Rachel, but he established a scholarship fund in her name for young women pursuing ecology degrees. Jake Ruiz stopped climbing after Simmons's conviction. The guilt of unknowingly helping manipulate evidence, even with good intentions, had broken something in him. He moved to Northern California and became a search and rescue volunteer, spending weekends looking for the lost. The Brennan family never fully recovered. How could they? But they found ways to live with the loss. James started taking photographs again, capturing landscapes Rachel would have loved. Susan continued attending support groups, now helping other families navigate the impossible terrain of missing loved ones. Tyler graduated college with a degree in criminal justice, wanting to understand the systems that had both failed and eventually served his sister. And in a filing cabinet in the San Bernardino County Sheriff's Department, Rachel Brennan's case file sits closed but not forgotten. A reminder that sometimes the truth takes years to surface, that justice requires patience and stubbornness in equal measure, and that even the smallest piece of evidence, a pair of boots, a belt buckle, a photograph, can speak for the dead when the living will not. What would you have done differently if you'd been investigating this case from the beginning? If you appreciate real investigations like this one, subscribe and stay curious.